Afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, also WFOV 92.1, and we are glad to have all of the audiences here, including Facebook. And we are coming together again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, and you can pick us up at your leisure on YouTube at allpointstv.com. We are coming together today at a very tragic moment in the nation's history. Again, we have a shooting incident that occurred. Well, we have two shooting incidents that occurred, one in El Paso, Texas, and the other one in Dayton, Ohio. And these incidents, we don't tend to just understand that we don't need to politicize these events. These politicians get in front of the cameras and start blaming everybody but the things that they are involved in that may be setting a climate for some of the things that are happening in this country. These tragedies come out of an environment. And when you look at what happened in El Paso, you see where this person, this 21-year-old young man, was shooting out of his frustration, based upon what we know now, based upon his comments on his posts. These things come out of a certain amount of frustration with the fact that our politicians are setting the tone, and look at how again they are doing these distractions. It's a gun issues. The NRA, we got too many guns out here. We got to find some way to get the guns out of the hands of the citizens. This is not a gun issue.
It isn't. I mean, that's another thing is too. The left always like say, "See, look what the right wingers are doing. These are your followers, Trump." Well, guess what? What did they say when it happened during the big liberals administration like Obama? Actually, if anybody would be more compelled to follow the leader, the one who actually induces people to want to put faith in one group of people or a handful of people is the left. The left is more responsible for a lot of terrible things than the right ever has been.
It's amazing, John, that they are the first thing they want to do was to act like Congress has a role in resolving these shootings by taking some legislative action against it. If Congress wants to do anything, what they can do, first of all, is set a tone for obeying the laws and being within the restraints of the laws of the country by practicing it on the national level themselves. The lawlessness in the Congress is part of this problem. And this shooter seems by his posting was frustrated by the fact that they have this illegal immigration taking place where people are breaking into this country, and this lawlessness is being rewarded by these politicians. And you're not going to hear that from them. They want to try to legislate something about the guns, which is nothing other than a distraction. The question is, what is the climate that's being set here where people don't feel that they have any voice in this illegal behavior that's going on in this country, through which we cannot stop it because of the lawlessness of our leaders in this country. And then they want to come out here talking about we need to reconvene Congress to do something about it, like they want to pass some laws against guns in this country. A lot of people have guns in this country. They have 300 million guns in this country in the hands of American citizens, and not 300 million people are going off with these guns. This is not a gun issue. This lawlessness is one that you see playing out in an environment of lawlessness, and this environment is one that's created by these political these parasites.
You know what? I wonder if the politician actually sit back and say, why is it, they always say America's so violent. Well, who's always set the tone for us to be violent people? Mm-hmm. They're always getting us, they search out places to send people, military actions.
Yeah.
They search it out. They search it out, especially the damn Democrats. Sorry. They're the ones responsible for it.
If they
More wars than anybody else.
It's sickening to see these politicians run into these cameras, getting in front of these cameras and speaking in these microphones about how this is white supremacy. This is Donald Trump's fanning the fires of white nationalism. And all these little excuses they make about why these things are going on. The reason why a lot of this is going on is because the country's leadership has led us into a blind alley where there's no respect for the rule of law in this country because the lawmakers themselves do not respect the rule of law in this country.
I think you're saying mouthful there, really, because let's face it, they show contempt for the American people when they drag out. Well, you guys have broke the law. Oh, and then you got they're the apologists for the left and the right. Oh, you don't understand the greater complexity of this. No, here's a bunch of rules you said you're supposed to live by. The Constitution says you only have this parameters to work under, and yet you constantly expand it. When anybody calls you on it, you're dismissive of it, and then you constantly, so blatantly, just violate every law you pass on us.
Yeah, the tone in the country, John, is set by the nation's leaders. You have to look and see what is cultivating this climate of violence in this country, and it never is traced back to the lawmakers. It's never traced back to the government in Washington. It's always some kook. And of course, we don't want to deny that it takes a person that's a kook to go out there and do the shooting. But the question is, what is a spark that sets these people off? And a lot of that is the environment which it plays in. You're not going to have a sane society where people are acting in nonviolent ways when you have violence as a part of the discourse in the nation by the nation's leaders. For example, how many persons are going to trace this kind of environment back to the fact that we have aborted in this country 60 million children in this country? And you want to have a country where people respect the rule of law, when the lawmakers have through Roe v. Wade in 1973, have put in motion lawlessness as a part of the way we do business in this country. In 1973, we set in motion the killing of children in the United States of America. And if you have that environment where this goes on, you can expect that when people do not respect the rule of law in our government, it's going to have a trickle-down effect in terms of how it plays off with the American people on the lower levels, those that are not being heard because they feel their voice has been negated. Really, that's most of us in this country. We don't have a voice in anything that's going on in this country. These politicians are running it on their own.
Well, look at
They
now.
don't care anything about what we're talking about.
Look at Kildee and Sabinow and Peters. None of those people listen to what the people say. Only the select people who are already echoing what they wanted to do and what they wanted to say. Anybody else has any voice in opposition to anything they do are silenced or mocked.
Yeah, our politicians are not listening to us. And this is a mockery that they would, the first thing they would say is we need to bring the Congress back because we have this incident and we've now got to do something about it, as if you can legislate these things out of existence. All this is about is them taking another incident, another tragedy, and then misdirecting the American people into believing that this is a gun issue through which they now have to violate the rule of law in the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. We don't need to have any more talk about guns in this country. We need to talk about these nuts out here, and we need to talk about these nuts we have running this government, because that's where the problem is. If there was a respect for the rule of law at the top, the climate that would be created would be one in which people understand that we have people that are running this country based upon the rule of law, and therefore it creates an environment of following the law because our rulers are law-abiding. But they make laws that they're not willing to accept themselves and do not follow the law, and the criminals in Washington are feeding this environment. And so when people get frustrated because they have people breaking into the country, for example, and they see that this is being nurtured and encouraged by the political leadership, you'll have incidents like this. This young man, on his website, on his site, was saying that he was angry about the break-in that is taking place by these immigrants coming to the country. He's not against immigration. He's against the illegality of this illegal immigration going on. He's upset because he doesn't see any other way to make his voice heard about what these politicians are doing. None of that's going to be discussed by them. They want to talk about the guns. This is not a gun issue. 300 million people are armed in this country. I should say that there are 300 million guns in this country. I don't know. There are not very many people in this country that are not gun owners. You don't have them out there shooting. So it's a mental health issue on the one hand, and something that pushes that envelope to push them over that line. And in this case right here, you politicians, you are responsible for this outside of the shooter himself. You'll take some responsibility for this environment through which these acts are being carried out. The shooter is ultimately the one responsible. I don't want to deny that. You don't have the right to go off because you are frustrated with what's going on. But at the same time, let's understand the environment is encouraging this kind of thing. And the politicians are not talking about what their role is in it. The NRA is responsible. Donald Trump is responsible. Donald Trump is not responsible, and the NRA is not responsible. This is not a white nationalist issue either. It's about the fact that there's lawlessness in this country encouraged by these politicians.
Come again, they're avoiding talking about the issues going on in Chicago. This shootings go on every weekend.
16, that's right.
Yeah,
16.
Why aren't they addressing that?
Weekend.
Where they ban guns, essentially. Yeah, I mean, owning guns in Illinois is so restricted, and largely because of Chicago. All right, I had friends that lived on there. They moved out of there because of that. Okay, many of the other reasons too is high taxes. They don't address that. And they're sending a weird. It's a false argument, and also misleading, because they're always saying it's racist. Look about Donald Trump's encouraged white supremacy and all this stuff. How about addressing the issue where more people are being killed within their own neighborhoods? Why don't you address that?
Yes, when we have silence on Facebook, is because we have some person in the studio, and they're adding to the discourse, and we're pausing to take those comments into consideration as well. You may not be able to hear it on Facebook, but that's why there are pauses in the discussion. Yeah, we're basically not dealing with the issue. I can almost guarantee that if the politicians were taking on the responsibilities and the roles they're playing in this country and setting a tone for being law-abiding themselves, it would send a tremendous message to all the others that the law-abiding members of our government are abiding by the laws that they are passing, and therefore they are to be respected by what they're doing, and therefore it creates other respect throughout the society by what we have at the top of the food chain. But if you have lawlessness at the top, you're going to have these kinds of this kind of spreading of this lawlessness, because the government itself is lawless. But you're not going to hear that on ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. You're not going to hear it on Fox. We're going to continue to talk about the guns. We're going to continue to attack the Second Amendment, and we're going to continue these distractions, and we're going to continue to get people killed in this country. We have got to return to the rule of law in the United States. And the chief values of the rule of law are the ones that are making the laws. The people in Washington, D.C. have blood on their hands in these incidents. And in these cities where you have these politicians creating these environments in these cities, part of that is their fault. These politicians are causing these environments through which we are getting killed in this country, but they're talking about the guns that people have. What about the kind of environment that they have in this country where they are creating these conditions? If we had more law-abiding politicians in this country, and I don't know in what city you'll find them. You certainly don't find them in the Congress. Donald Trump is the only one in Washington right now that's trying to address these problems that we're having inside these cities and inside this country. Donald Trump is singularly trying to address these issues. And all this talk about white supremacy and the white nationalists, all that is a distraction. These people are not out here killing because of white supremacy and white nationalism. They want their country. They want to have a rule of law in their country. And they want these politicians to enforce the laws that they themselves have put on the books that they're not willing to enforce. That's what this is about. People feel powerless in this country. Their voices are not being heard. And violence is the language of the unheard. These political acts are people who are at the last end of trying to make their voices heard because they don't want this lawlessness that's being encouraged by these politicians. And politicians in Washington, you are the ones that have to take some responsibility for this. Stop talking about grabbing guns and grab your conscience and start doing what you elected to do in Washington, D.C. You're there to enforce the law. You have immigration laws on the books, and you're not enforcing those laws. And people out here are frustrated because they see that they have a government that's made up of nothing but criminals. You guys up there in Washington, nothing but a bunch of criminals. We don't see the rule of law in Washington, D.C. We see a gang up there. One gang in the Democratic Party and a gang in the Republican Party. You guys are running this country into the ground with your nonsense. So we have incidents like this. And guns, talking about taking the guns away. What are you going to do? Take the guns away from people that have not done any of these acts? You can't go out here and start grabbing guns because people have guns and that they're not using them. And you cannot predict who's going to use the guns. What you can do is take some responsibilities at your level and put an environment of abiding by the law at the national level, and then let that begin to trickle down into how we behave out here in the society that you're running. You're running this society. You are responsible for the environment that's being set in this country. And if you're not going to take that as a responsibility, you need to get on the sideline and just shut up. And all of these persons in the Democratic Party running to the mic, talking about Donald Trump has set this climate. They were doing the shooting before Donald Trump was president. They were under Obama. They were burning the country down. They were burning these cities down under Obama. And that's because Obama set that tone. People out here acting lawless, jumping on police cars and jumping on the roof of police cars. All that was going on during the Obama administration. And that's because of the lawlessness of the Obama administration. You set that tone and you're going to get these results. You set another tone, you'll get another result. But you cannot talk about the problem is the guns in the country while you, in fact, absent your role in what's taking place here. You are responsible. And you need to take some responsibility for it and stop talking about going after the Second Amendment in this country. Because you're going to create more problems if you start grabbing guns, because people are not going to let the government have their guns, not with the lawlessness in Washington. Because if you take the guns, then the lawlessness we're now saying, as bad as it is going to get a lot worse. And that's why you're creating problems there as well. It's not a gun issue. This is an issue of lawlessness, and the lawlessness starts at the top, and it's trickling down into other parts of society, and until you clean it up at the top, it's not going to be cleaned up at the bottom. You got to get it straightened out at the government level. And I guarantee you that will start a whole different paradigm in America. But you're not going to be able to clean this thing up as long as you have legalized murder in this country. You can call it what you want to. You have legalized murder going on in this country. They're sanctioned by the government of the United States on all levels. Laws passed by Congress, endorsed by the Supreme Court, and you have all this killing going on in the name of the government. And how can they speak from a moral voice? How can they come out in opposition to this lawlessness when they're lawless themselves? We have lawless people in Washington. Our government is made up of people that are lawless. We have gangsters running this country. And then they come out here trying to act like they can speak to a moral tone when they are immoral themselves. Okay, let's understand that we're not talking about the issue. The issue, first of all, is what can government do? And what government can do is change the tone of this country by their own lawless behavior. They can do that today. But no, they're not going to talk about that. They're going to talk about they need to come back and pass other restrictions on guns, which has nothing to do with why these people are going off. They're using guns, but they're not going off because of guns. They're going off because they're frustrated with the leadership of this country. And we all are frustrated with the leadership of this country because we are sick and tired of what these gangsters in government are doing in this country.
See, the thing is, well, government's going to say, look what these lunatics have done. And they're lunatics. I mean, these guys are, that's not going to be thrown away. But let's face it, government hires people who are lunatics to work for them. Okay, they're just as willing to kill people at the drop of a hat as these guys are. So to me, they're a bunch of lunatics. All these guys, I don't care if they wear a uniform and work for the government or these idiots. I mean, they're all lunatics.
The government is made up of the same type of criminals that are out here on the street, and the only difference is their criminal behavior is sanctioned by law. The killing that goes on in the name of the government, let's look at that as a problem. And we don't seem to understand the connection. All this violence that we're talking about in this society, all of it is linked together. Until you clean up on the national level, in terms of what the government is doing, you're not going to be able to clean up on the local level. These incidents are going to continue to occur. The lawlessness in all these cities, this is what Donald Trump is trying to address. In Baltimore and all these other cities, in these inner cities, that lawlessness is sanctioned by government. The continuation of the lawlessness inside of look at how much of the money that's been thrown at this problem is being stolen by these politicians. They're asking in Baltimore, whatever happened to the billions of dollars that was pumped in there to resolve some of these problems in Baltimore? Where's the money? The money, I tell you what the money is. The money is that which is siphoned off in the pockets of the politicians. It goes on here too in Flint. There's lawlessness in this town. Money is sent in here to deal with the water crisis in Flint. You think that money went to the problem in Flint? They're still doing bottled water in the city of Flint. People are still passing out water. The problem has not been fixed in Flint. It's because of the lawlessness of the politicians here. They don't like me saying that because it's supposed to be the problem elsewhere. It's lawlessness in the city of Flint, and it's in all these other cities. And it all comes back to the political leaders of these cities. These politicians are causing these problems. And until we begin to hold them accountable, part of it is going to the polls and understanding that these people sitting in power 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and sometimes 40 years, this is a problem for us. These people have got to be made to know that when they're sitting in power and they do not perform the job they were sent there to do, the wrath of the voters will be heard at the polls. Until that happens, we cannot address this problem. Grabbing guns is not going to be a solution to this problem. This problem is people sitting in government not doing the job they were sent there to do. And we have these incidents as a result of that. It's not going to stop by you grabbing guns, you politicians. You got to clean up your act first. And then begin to create the environment through which these incidents become rarefied because they understand the legality in which they're living, the system that they're living in. But you're setting the tone for this. And grabbing out guns is just another diversion on your part. Okay, I'm gonna get off that, but I just want us to understand that this is not gonna resolve this problem. We do this every time there's a gun incident. The guns gotta go. The guns gotta go. The guns are guaranteed in the Constitution, and we are not going to let the government confiscate our guns. You can forget that. You're not going to have our guns. If the government wants to start a larger conflagration in this country, start grabbing the American people's guns, and you're going to have a problem. Because if you grab the people's guns, only you are the ones armed in society, and the people know they cannot trust you with guns.
Look what they did in peaceful
things. It's not going to happen.
Look what happened there in Kent State in Ohio, okay? Back in the 60s, 70s.
1970.
Yeah, they shot, the National Guard fired upon them. Look at the strikebreakers that used to go step in. The National Guard used to be the role of strikebreakers. You cannot trust people in uniform, but hired by the government, to look out for you. They are there for the elite. They are not there for the average person.
People could not believe on May 4th, 1970, John, they could not believe that the people would shoot at their own children. The National Guard and so on were shooting at their children. You know, remember reading that book about don't shoot, we are your children. If government would do that, people were surprised that the National Guard came down at Kent State University. They were surprised the government came down on those children. And what was really interesting the pictures of that incident is that there were no blacks there. They could not say that the blacks were doing X, Y, and Z, and they missed and they shot these. Only whites were in those photos. These were their children. And you may remember when they began to realize that the people the governing class will kill them too. You probably remember the response was to start protesting through shrieking. They began to shriek on these television shows because they realized that any coming out politically against them endangered their lives. So they began to protest in a different way. But they would shoot their own children down. And don't shoot your children came out of that. Okay, we're going to take a break from WFOV, and I'm going to calm down my rant because I'm very upset about what's happening right now. And we're being distracted again by these politicians. You clean your act up in Washington. Then you can come and talk to us about some things that we ought to be doing out here. Okay, I'll see you on the other side of the break, WFOV, and thank you for staying tuned, and I hope you'll come back in 4 minutes. We're going to continue with what we're going to do here in our program today, and we're not just going to stay on that one issue. I want to talk about also another issue that came up last week, and that was this payoff of the family of Eric Garner. You know, we just don't get it. We're so distracted in the United States, and the ruling class can tell us anything. Paying off Eric Garner's family and taxpayers being held accountable for it is just another incidence of these government leaders doing anything to get the spotlight off of them. Eric Garner was not choked to death. I have the report right here. You can get off that. This is nothing other than these quizzling politicians who don't want any of the spotlight on them, and so they're willing to pay this money out in order to get from behind the eight ball because they don't want to take responsibility for their role in these incidents. You probably are aware of the fact that those officers were sent there by de Blasio because of the taxation policies in New York. Has that made any headlines in New York or in the nation? Has anybody in the Washington Post printed that those officers were down there because they have a prohibitive tax on cigarettes in New York? And so what the government has created is a black market for cigarettes. And Eric Garner was down there selling cigarettes on the corner, and because it is a tax issue, because if you're going to sell cigarettes in the black market, if you're going to go to another state and buy the cigarettes and bring them to New York and sell it in the black market, you're denying the city of New York taxes in its coffers. And so the police was sent there by de Blasio to stop that. And they go down there, and they can't back up when there's no compliance, and they are trying to arrest this man, who, by the way, has been arrested before, but for doing the same thing. I think the arrest record was quite long for Eric Garner, and they kept coming back to the scene of the crime and doing the same thing over again. And when he resisted arrest, what are they supposed to do? Walk away and say then he's not going to allow us to arrest him and walk away from the scene? They've been sent there to stop this. De Blasio, you initiated this incident. And then when the incident occurs, you want to then blame the police officers for having caused it when the cause is in your office. This is what those police officers are talking about there. But let's understand what happened to Eric Garner, because this is a payoff to shut the family up. It wasn't a payoff because of the fact that Eric Garner was choked to death, because he wasn't choked to death. And I have the report right here. This is the medical. This is a person that's in the medical field reviewing the incident, and this is what he had to say about it. Having reviewed the video several times now, and being a physician Okay, we want to welcome back WFOV. Thank you for coming back. And we're still on this rant about our government and the governments in these different cities that are failing the American people and then throwing the spotlight on somebody else that did not cause the problem. We're talking about Eric Garner here, and I want to read something about the Eric Garner incident because Eric Garner was not choked to death. That's a way of getting the spotlight off of what really happened in New York. De Blasio, you on the spotlight here. Having reviewed the video several times now, this is a physician looking at the video and reporting what he sees in what occurred there. He's analyzing what really took place. Having reviewed the video several times now, and being a physician who specialized in the surgery of the very obese, I believe that the cause of Mr. Garner's death was not, quote, unquote, police brutality or negligence, but rather the unfortunate synergy between his disease or morbid obesity and the actions most police perform countless times with only transient discomfort to the arrestee. The decision of the grand jury was reasonable. Mr. Garner's demise was a consequence of a confluence of many factors, most of which were beyond the ken of a policeman and which occurred in devastatingly rapid sequence. Eric Garner was very obese, said to weigh at least 350 pounds. In fact, based on his weight and his height, he very likely weighed more than that, but very few scales read high enough to accurately measure weight of that magnitude. By simple observation, one could see that his abdomen was very large and protuberant, very obese and very large, and so on. His chest was similarly blanketed with a heavy layer of fat, and he had no visible neck, no indentation on his jaw, typically present in non-obese persons, which permits application of a chokehold to briefly arrest the carotid circulation to render him unconscious and manageable. The chokehold was ineffective as a control, but it served to take him to the ground by leverage. Medically, he was said to suffer from sleep apnea, and he may well have Pickwickian syndrome. Okay, let me read the part that is talking about the choking. The squad of officers who sought to arrest Garner was under the supervision of a sergeant who was black and female and was therefore very unlikely to be racially motivated. Mr. Garner was being placed under arrest for a tax law violation related to the sale of untaxed cigarettes, a trivial offense. However, Mr. Garner actively resisted arrest, and that criminal offense forces the police to assert their authority regardless of the gravity of the original crime. He says also, next time you get a traffic ticket, refuse to sign it and see what happens to you. In other words, you're going to invite force. Now, let me get to the part about the choking, because that's what everybody's saying. They said he was choked to death. Eric Garner said 11 times that he could not breathe. He didn't say a single time that he was being choked. And the reason for that is because at the time that he said, "I can't breathe," there was no choking taking place at that point. I'll read that to you in the report as well. Okay, so getting to that part of it where Garner is having problems breathing. Listen to this part right here. Officer Pantelio can be seen in the video placing his left arm alongside of Mr. Garner's neck, alongside of his neck, like this. I'm showing the hand on the side of the neck, not underneath the neck. In fact, that would have been a problem for the police if they had put their hand underneath his neck, standing behind him. That would have been a problem for the police. They're standing on the side of him with their hand on the side of his neck to pull him to the side, because the only way you're going to take him down is pull him where his knees won't buckle, where the knees will lock. And by the knees locking, you can pull him to the ground. If you, in fact, do it from the back and pull him to the back with a chokehold under his neck, what's going to happen there is he's going to rear up, and you're going to be on his back, as I said last week. So at the time he says, "I can't breathe," there's no arm, there's no hand on his windpipe. His breathing is not caused by choking, because he never said that while he was being taken down. Which, once they took him down, they released the arm from the area of the neck. Let me see if I can read that part about there's no impression of Patelio's arm under Garner's chin, as is necessary for an effective carotid occlusion, meaning that if you don't have your arm under the chin of the person, you're not able to choke him. You can't choke him from the side, either side of the person's neck. Okay, let me read this part here. Let's see if I can find the part about this part here. The effect of Patelio's effort was to unbalance Garner, causing him to fall to the ground, with Patelio winding up on top of Garner. At this point, Patelio can clearly be seen to release his ineffectual quote-unquote chokehold, because he's not choking him, he's on the side of the neck, and to roughly hold Garner's head to the pavement while the other officers tried to subdue him. It was after Patelio had released his hold that Garner uttered, "I can't breathe," several times. Garner was still alive and conscious after Patelio released him from the quote-unquote chokehold, the hand to the side of the neck, quote-unquote chokehold. Mr. Garner was subdued by other officers who placed their weight on his body in order to rest his arms behind him to apply handcuffs. Mr. Garner's chest capacity was already seriously compromised by his obesity, and officers' weight on his chest would further diminish his lung capacities. Pressure on Mr. Garner's abdomen also exerted to subdue him, forced the enormous fatty contents of his abdomen to be pushed upward toward his chest, restricting his diaphragmatic motion. People on your chest does not allow you to expand your breathing capacity. And for a person that's asthmatic, that can be that's a problem. It's a problem if you're not asthmatic. But for a person that's asthmatic, that is a tremendous problem. But that comes out of them trying to subdue Garner. If he doesn't resist, none of this takes place. And choking him there's no choking going on at this point. He's not being choked at this point. Unfortunately, when Mr. Garner became unconscious from hypoxia and carbon dioxide narcosis, the officers appeared bewildered and evidently did not realize Mr. Garner was rapidly dying from cessation of his breathing and then of his cardiac activity. They're not aware that Eric Garner is having a heart attack. The subsequent post-mortem examination is said to have shown no evidence of injury to either the larynx or the hyoid bone. This bone is not, there's no injury to this area, the area underneath the chin. Mr. Garner is said to have died from, quote, chest compression, the compression of the chest, and that's because they're sitting on him. and then the associated heart disease. So this officer, who's probably going to be fired, is going to be fired not for choking Garner to death. He's going to be fired to protect the politician in New York. This is a cover-up. This officer was sent to do his job by the city fathers in New York, got into a situation where the person that was to be arrested was not compliant, dies in the altercation, and then I think the money being paid to the family is a cover-up because they don't want any further light thrown on what really went on there. People still do not know why those officers were there. They were sent there. De Blasio sent them there. And if they did not have this taxation, where the sin tax, because they're taxing everything to pay for these government entitlements, which is what politicians do, so as to be able to get elected, because they want to throw all this free stuff at the voters, so the voters would vote for them, and that creates a taxation problem. They pay for it, and the way they were paying for it in this case here was raise the sin tax, pay for it through the cigarette tax, and other things that they do to raise money. And this led to Eric Garner being arrested, and when he resisted, that resistance caused more physical force to be brought to the scene, because the officer's not going to walk away from it because they've been assigned to do a job, but the person assigned them to the job are not in part and not being a part of what's being discussed here. This is a politician's nightmare. The officers are ordered to do their job, and their job is to do what the politicians say is their job. They have to go down there and do what they're being told to do. And all the attention on this officer. If he's fired, it's nothing other than another part of the cover-up, because they're covering up the real gangsters in this case here. And those gangsters in the New York Parliament, those that make up the laws of New York, they cause this problem. We never blame these politicians for these incidents. And if you trace everything back to the source, the politicians are ultimately the ones that's responsible. And they're talking about guns, and now talking about guns, and this incident occurred this past weekend. It's not the guns. It's the environment set by these politicians. And if you want to do something to solve these problems, solve it at your level. All these things that the politicians are doing, you're the ones causing these things to occur. And until you get your act together, this problem cannot be resolved, because it takes place at the levels of power in the United States. And paying Garner, the family, $5.7 million of taxpayers' money, that's just more taxpayers' money being thrown at problems caused by the politicians. It's nothing other than a cover-up. And the taxpayers on the dime of the politicians to cover up so the politicians don't get the blame for it, but they are the ultimate ones at fault here. Continue to be at fault of these incidents in this country. And until we get the real culprits called on the carpet, we're not going to solve these problems in the United States. It cannot be solved, because it goes back to the levels of power in this country. What role are they playing in it? And that never gets discussed in these incidents. Every time something happens in America, we should look at, okay, what role was being played in it by the politicians? What role did they play? What did the politicians do to cause this incident? Who is ultimately in back of what occurred? It starts at this level here, but who is the ultimate one that's in charge of the incident? Because who sent them to the scene of the incident? Who is that person? Who's the one that's not in the spotlight? And I guarantee you, in almost all these cases here, we'll find that there is a political party that's in back of these acts being committed out here in the public domain. We don't ever look behind them to find out the real genesis of the situation. And that is what some of the persons are trying to point out, such as the article that was done by Ann Coulter. She said this was a tax issue. This was an issue of taxation. If that had not been a problem in terms of the taxation of the politicians in New York, you would not have had a cigarette problem on the street. You would not have had a black market. The black market is created because of the taxation. But we don't look at that. We look at, okay, here are these officers enforcing the law. They cause a death. We got to fire somebody. And then when they start shooting, we got to look at the guns that the guy used. We don't want to look at what was the environment to which these incidents took place in. What environment did this play out in? And who are the custodians of the environment? We never want to look at that part of it. Until we get to that level of dealing on that level there, we can guarantee that these problems are not going to be resolved. In fact, we never even deal with the problem. We're dealing with the symptom of the problem. The problem is tied into the climate that we have in this country, particularly in these inner cities, by these politicians who belong to one party pretty much. These Democrats, and they're up there at the microphone talking about Donald Trump set the climate. Donald Trump didn't set this climate. They were doing these things before Donald Trump became president in these cities. Nobody talked about Barack Obama setting a climate in terms of this man, along with Al Sharpton, had people out here burning these cities down. That wasn't Donald Trump. That was these politicians. In Washington, I'm talking about Barack Obama. Barack Obama was spreading some of this venom out here with Black Lives Matter, encouraging these groups. People out in the street talking about pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. What do we want? Dead cops. They were out there creating these chants, encouraging this behavior. They were in Baltimore. They were the ones importing those rocks. There were people that saw them. Those rocks that were thrown at the police department. There were people that before they realized what was going on, there were people that actually saw that they were bringing those rocks into the city, importing them, and passing these rocks out to these people out in the street, that they were then throwing rocks at these police officers, blaming these officers because they wanted this chaos in the street. In other words, the chaos in the street is encouraged by these politicians. They want this chaos because what that does, it grows more government. It has people believing they need more government, which means then that if you have more government, you have less liberty. That's what Franklin was talking about when Benjamin Franklin said those that would in fact trade liberty for more safety will get neither and deserve neither. The government wants us to have this destabilized environment, because if the environment is destabilized, people will call for more government restraints. Larger government is not going to solve this problem. Taking our liberty away from us is not going to solve this problem. This problem is going to be resolved by having an environment where being law-abiding is encouraged by those that run the society. And you cannot do it by being lawless yourself, you lawmakers. I'm just telling you, you got blood on your hands today from those incidents. You cannot come before the American people and start talking about something that has nothing to do with the problem. The problem is not the guns. The problem is the environment that's being created here. And we have people that have sanctioned murder in America. We're not going to have you out here telling us to be law-abiding, because those of us are not. Most Americans are law-abiding because that's who we are as a nation. But you can't tell those persons to be law-abiding and you don't set a tone for it yourself. What about you being a law-abiding citizen? you lawmakers in the nation's capital and inside these cities. Every one of these cities right now, every one of these inner cities are being run by criminals. You can call them politicians if you want to. These are gangsters running these governments. The gangsters in Washington, we got gangster government. That's what was being written about in this book called Gangster Government. Forget the woman's name now that wrote this book. That's what they're talking about. Oh, that's what Peter Schweikers is talking about in the book he wrote. His antidote to it is throw them all out. Or the other book he wrote called Architects of Ruin. The architects of ruin. The politicians. We should not take our eyes off of these politicians and the role they're playing in the society. What are they doing? What are the politicians doing? All this stuff you're talking about up there, these distractions, look, we're going to be looking at you. What role you're playing? What is your role in the breakdown of law and order in this society? And what are you doing in Washington to bring that law and order breakdown about? What role are you playing in it? Because you are involved in it, because you're not maintaining the laws that you've passed on the books, you're violating the laws that you pass yourself. You pass these laws, and you're not abiding by these laws. And to ask for people to be law-abiding when you're not law-abiding yourself, it's not going to happen that way. We want our government to be law-abiding. And we don't have that right now. We don't have it in Washington, and we don't have it in these cities. We have gangsters running our government. And this feeds into the gangsterism in the general society. I think we need to begin to focus on that. If we clean up our government, if we would focus on our role as citizens in terms of those that are not serving the ends of the people in our government, if we could take our responsibility seriously and go to the polls and vote these people out that are not carrying out the will of the American people, we can clean this up. We don't need to have all this violence in our society, but you cannot clean it up by talking about these distractions. The guns got to go. We got to amend the Second Amendment. We've got to, in fact, pass more gun laws. We need more gun regulation. That is not going to solve the problem. We need more law-abiding people at the level of government in the United States. If we don't get that, we cannot solve this problem. This incident comes out of an environment here created by these politicians. And if that environment is not cultivated in a different way, you're going to have this lawlessness in all these cities. We have a breakdown in America right now of law and order in this country. And we can't even walk the streets of our cities anymore. They don't walk the streets in this city here, where I am. And I doubt if they're walking the streets in this city that you're in those that's listening to the program on Facebook. Are they safe in your city? And if they're not safe in the cities where you are, why aren't they safe? Why aren't these cities that used to be safe in this country? When I was coming up in a very poor community in Birmingham, Alabama, very poverty-stricken community, old people on the front porch, people walking up and down the street all day long and all night, didn't have cars, had to walk where they were, sometimes walking in alleys where there were no lights, taking shortcuts to where they were going because they're walking. Nobody is being shot. Nobody is being attacked in these poor communities. People were law-abiding. That's because we believed that our government was law-abiding. But now that we have the internet and have YouTube and all these other ways of getting information, we see that what we thought about the government was being law-abiding, and therefore they could tell us to be law-abiding out here as well. We thought we were following an example. They were setting an example here. And now that we see through a lot of these different instruments of information that's out there now, that they're not law-abiding themselves, it sets a tone for everybody else. There's a breakdown of law and order in America right now in our country. And it starts at the top. I'm going to continue to say that. It starts at the top. And as long as we do not address the problem up there at that level, We're gonna watch you politicians for the next few days and weeks to see what you're talking about. If you don't talk about what role you're playing, and you start talking about these guns again, we're gonna call you on that, because that is not going to solve this problem. Our guns are not going. We're not giving you our guns. You can get off that right now. We're not giving you our guns, and you're not going to take them. If you want to start down that path, I can tell you right now, the American people are not going to tolerate it, and you got a problem, because they're under you. You're encouraging these kinds of situations because you want to make this a gun issue. You want to do it. You want to do in America what they've done in England, what they've done in France, and they're telling us from those places where they confiscated these guns in Australia. They're telling the American people, do not allow the government to make this a gun issue and give the government your guns, because of now what they found out what they're going into. Because now in those countries, only the government is armed. And that is not a good thing to have politicians armed when their citizens are not armed. You can see that in North Korea. And if we are heading there, you'll get the same result. I'm calling today to get to the source of the problem. And that's these politicians, to hold them accountable for what we see going on in this country. That's the source of the problem. And we got to deal with it at the source. Okay, we're going to get out of here, but we're not going to stop our rant on the real source of the problems in this country. Okay, until next week, we want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.